Are you sure you remember your family the way it really was? My name is Emma Collins. I'm 29, and I live in Denver, Colorado. If stories like this help you make sense of your own kitchen table silences, I'd love to have you along. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Title: I blamed Dad for Mom leaving, but her last letter revealed he was the one holding our family together. I used to think my father ruined everything. If you had asked 16-year-old me to draw a villain, I would have sketched a man with my dad's shoulders, broad and solid, always squared like he was bracing for a wind only he could feel. I would have drawn a face with the lines my dad carried even in his 30s, the kind you get from squinting into harsh weather or holding back a sentence so the room stays calm. I would have shaded the jaw, the silence. Maybe I would have added a bundle of bills tucked in a pocket, a tool belt cinched too tight, the smell of metal and coffee, and a little bit of engine grease. That was my dad in my memory's courtroom, the accused. I live on the second floor of a brick building just off Colfax. The windows face west, and in the late afternoon, the light makes the city look forgiving. Denver's sky is generous that way. On the day I decided to tell this story, the Rockies were a long, patient line beyond my pain, the clouds moving like slow thoughts. I had been cleaning out a drawer where old receipts go to fossilize, takeout in bad years, tax documents in better ones, ticket stubs from concerts I pretended changed my life, and I found a photograph. It was me, 8 years old, wearing a sweater with a bright red cardinal on it. My mother had braided my hair so the bow lay neatly on the left shoulder. My father stood behind us, one hand on my shoulder, the other hovering as if the moment were too delicate to put full weight on. Memory is a terrible editor. It cuts scenes you might need later. It adds background music to dress up a truth that was plain when it happened. For years, I kept only the scenes where Dad was hard and Mom was breaking. I saved the soundtrack of shouting in the hallway and left out the ones where the house smelled like cinnamon and orange peel and my father whistled under his breath. The Christmas before my mother left, the oven broke. Dad was an electrician, not an appliance whisperer, but he pulled the oven away from the wall, turned off the breaker, and lay on his side on the kitchen floor with a flashlight between his teeth. I sat cross-legged on the linoleum, following the beam like it was a comet tail. Mom perched on a chair with a mixing bowl on her lap, the batter going cold while we waited. My father's boots left fine dust on the floor. "Hand me the flathead," he said in that gentle, husky way of his. I passed it to him and tried to make my hand steady like his. "Will it work?" I asked. "Everything works given care," he said. He didn't look at me. He was speaking to the screws, the wires, the oven, the universe. "Sometimes it just takes longer than you want. If you grew up in a house like mine, maybe you learned the same calculus. Dad equals discipline, Mom equals warmth. Dad equals no, Mom equals yes. Dad equals rules, Mom equals music. The heart finds the simple math it can live with." That same year, my parents started arguing in the kind of whispers that are louder than shouting. The words didn't carry, but the tones did, and tones are the first language children understand. I would hear cutlery being set down with care that was really anger, doors closing softly that were really slammed, two people apologizing for making a life heavy while they kept adding bricks. I learned where the floor creaked and how to step around it to hear more. It felt important to be informed of my own home. On the night she left, my mother gave me a kiss that held longer than usual. Her hands were dry and warm. She smelled like the eucalyptus cream she used when she couldn't sleep. "Emma, you're my brave girl," she said. "Not brave like warriors, brave like people who hold on when the wind comes." I didn't like the word brave. It sounded like a movie. It didn't sound like homework and mac and cheese and my dad's truck idling in winter mornings. I came home from school the next day to a house that had the same furniture but different gravity. You know that sensation when a room has been cleaned while you weren't there? The sigh the couch makes, the way the air feels rearranged. Now imagine that, but with the color turned down. The living room had that hush. The photo frames on the mantel were straighter, the Afghan folded. The mug my mother loved, the one painted with tiny blue flowers, was rinsed and left on the drying rack, a lip of suds still clinging to the rim. There was no note on the table, because notes are for goodbyes that can be explained. My father was at the kitchen counter, both hands around a cup of coffee as if it were the only thing in the room that might tip over. He looked up. "Hey, Em," he said. His voice had the stiffness a person gets when they've been alone all day with a truth and are trying out how to say it without breaking the bowl it sits in. "Why don't you sit down?" I didn't sit. I gripped the strap of my backpack like a lifeline. "Where's Mom?" He swallowed. He tried again. "She needs some time. She's going to stay with Aunt Maggie for a while." "How long is a while?" "I don't know. There are things a parent can't say. Not because the words don't exist, but because to speak them would be to blow out all the candles at once." My father's brow knit the way it did when he was tracing a wire that kept shorting a circuit. He didn't say she might not come back. He didn't say she had been drifting, a small boat in a fog, and he had been on the shore calling her name until his voice went hoarse. He put a hand out and I stepped back. The kitchen was vast. The floor a map I didn't know how to read. "I can make you a grilled cheese," he said, and later, when I was older, I understood this as love offered in the language he spoke best. Tasks, care, something warm you can eat with your hands. I did not want a grilled cheese. I wanted someone to blame. If you're the kind of person who likes answers, you'll appreciate how quickly blame can make a room feel organized. Blame is a hard chair you can sit in. It holds your weight. It doesn't rock. For a long time, I blamed my father. Not for a sin proven in a ledger, but for 1,000 quiet verdicts. He worked too much. He didn't say the right words. He was a wall when my mother was trying to be a window. He said no when yes was what love should sound like. He believed in schedules. He made lists. He fixed things that weren't the real problem. I collected these verdicts like stones in my pocket. They made me walk heavy and certain. The certainty was its own kind of comfort. In the weeks that followed, my dad ran the house like an electrician runs a job site. He left before dawn for a call-out and was back by 6. The truck door thumped shut with that hollow sound older vehicles make. He'd stand in the doorway a second before stepping into the living room, shoulders rolling to drop the day. "How was school?" he asked every day, as if asking was the rope you throw to a person in water. I shrugged and kept my eyes on the TV. He learned how to make spaghetti, too soft the first time, just right the second. He learned the price of cereal and the way the laundry net eats socks. He wrote checks at our kitchen table, forehead furrowed, the paper shining under the lamp like a small lake. Once, I woke to find him asleep in the chair by the window, his boots still on, one hand on a textbook I had left open on the coffee table. It was a story about a girl who had left. Breaks your heart, stories like that, when you're living inside one. People whispered the way communities do. They were kind, mostly. Teachers sent home extra permission slips for activities that were now just a little bit out of reach. The church ladies pressed foil-wrapped casseroles into Dad's hands and told him he was doing a wonderful job. If you've ever been told you're doing a wonderful job while the one thing you want is impossible, you'll know how salt and honey can be the same taste. I kept my bedroom like a border control station. Posters arranged by allegiance. Books stacked like walls. The desk at the window where my mother used to sit with me and help with long division, now an empty plaza. Dad knocked before entering, always. He never entered without knocking. "Lights out by 10, kiddo," he'd say, and I would turn out the light and keep reading under the covers by phone glow, convinced that my private resistance was proof that I belonged to the person who had left, and not the one who stayed. The first time we spoke about her out loud, the summer cicadas were doing that summer cicada thing where the sound is both outside you and inside your bones. We were in the backyard. Dad was sorting tools. I was supposed to be cleaning the bird bath, but was really listening for a confession. "Do you ever hear from Mom?" I said, trying to sound offhanded and landing on brittle. He paused. "Sometimes." He went back to sorting. "Sometimes, what does that mean?" "It means sometimes," he said, and something in me cracked because it was the right answer and the wrong one. I threw the sponge down so hard water spattered my legs. "You never tell me anything," I said. "You never told me why she left." He put the wrench down as if it were a sacred object. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Some stories," he said, "aren't ours to tell." He looked at me in that steady way that made me feel seen and trapped at the same time. "But none of it was your fault." "I didn't say it was my fault," I snapped. He nodded once, like we had just arrived together at a painful truth. I had said it in 100 other ways. He reached out. I stepped back. We rehearsed that choreography for years. The thing about growing up is that you pack your bags with the clothes that fit you in one season, and then you keep carrying them even after you've grown past them. I took my blame to college like a favorite sweater. It made me warm in rooms where I could have been cold. It gave me something to do when everyone else called home on Sundays. I was busy not calling. My father texted me pictures of his lunches, the world's ugliest sandwiches, meat and mustard and bread, no lettuce, no care for presentation. "Fuel," he'd write. "Don't skip yours." I would roll my eyes and then, because habit is its own religion, eat. I wish I could tell you that somewhere in those years, I understood that my father was not a villain. That there was a moment when I caught him in the kitchen crying into a dish towel and the spell broke. That we hugged and the hug reset the house. That's not how it happened. The truth is less cinematic and more faithful. It looks like a man keeping a calendar. A man who shows up for parent-teacher conferences alone. A man who learns to braid his daughter's hair by watching a video 6 times and having it look awful the first 5. A man who buys a dress too big with a receipt tucked carefully in his wallet, just in case his guess is wrong, and laughs when it is and drives back to the store with his daughter teasing him, both of them happy in a low-key, ordinary way. It looks like a heart making a home out of repetition. When I moved to Denver after college, the altitude made me dizzy for weeks. The sky's largeness felt like a dare. I rented a 1-bedroom with cracked crown molding and a stove that sometimes needed a gentle kick to behave. My father drove me and my boxes out from our town, 8 hours and a thermos of coffee, the radio steady. We didn't talk about the thing we didn't talk about. We talked about the snowpack and the best route through Glenwood and whether I'd found a grocery store yet. He carried the heaviest boxes up 2 flights and didn't complain once. When we were done, he stood in my doorway and looked around as if memorizing the angles. "You good?" he asked. "I'm good," I said. It was the closest we had come to honest in a while. On the night after he left, the apartment echoed. I ordered Thai and ate on the floor, my back against a wall that hadn't learned my shape yet. I called my mother's number, which I had saved in my phone under a name I thought would keep me from calling it. Laura, don't. It went to voicemail. "You've reached Laura," the recording said, light and breezy. "The way your voice is when you're saying your name into a machine and want to sound like you're doing great." I hung up. I texted my father instead. Made it through the first day. A minute later, "Proud of you, kiddo." 2 minutes after that, a photo of his sandwich. When you blame someone, you don't notice the way they keep choosing you. You count what they didn't say and miss what they did. You inventory the absence and overlook the presence because presence is quiet. It doesn't bang the door on its way in. Sometimes on Sundays, I'd walk City Park and watch fathers with strollers. There is a posture fathers have when they push a stroller, as if they are prepared to intercept a runaway train. If you've never noticed it, You will now. I tried to imagine my father years earlier pushing me, his hand steady, scanning the horizon for a hazard I couldn't have named. Then I would scold myself for being sentimental and call an old friend to talk about brunch. The day I turned 29, my Aunt Maggie called. "You coming home soon?" she asked. "Your dad's planning a barbecue. He's terrible at hamburgers, but he insists." "I have a deadline," I said. It was a reflex. She was quiet, and then she said, "Emma, your father is not perfect. I'm not either. Your mother wasn't either. But your father, he is the one who—" She stopped. "Never mind. Come if you can." Something sharpened in me, the old automatic defense. Don't romanticize him. Don't give him the credit for staying when staying was the only thing he knew how to do. The voice in my head sounded sure, like it always had. It didn't leave room for other songs. Later that night, I opened the birthday card my father had mailed. Inside was $50 in cash, folded into a square like a tent. "Not sure what your streaming services cost these days," he had written, and I laughed, alone in my apartment, and then felt the sting of tears behind my eyes for no good reason. Below the joke, a second sentence. "Proud of how you live your life." Alive, as if he were blessing away, not a list of achievements. For a second, I let myself wonder what it must have cost him, all these years, to have his daughter set him in the wrong role and stay there. I put the card back in its envelope and tucked it into the drawer where I keep things I think I'll get around to organizing. It was the same drawer where, months later, I'd find something else. Another envelope older, the paper soft as a worn shirt, the handwriting so familiar it made the little hairs on my arm stand up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back when I was 8 and my mother hung laundry on the line in white Colorado sun, she used to play a game with me. "Close your eyes," she'd say, "and tell me what's missing." She would remove a clothespin from the basket or a sock from the line. I'd open my eyes and scan. "The blue sock," I'd say. "No," she'd grin, "look again." And there it would be, a different absence, one I hadn't noticed because I'd been so sure about the sock. When I think about my family now, I think about that game. How certain I was of what was missing. How I learned to look again. I'm not here to rewrite villains into saints. I don't trust stories that do that. I'm here to tell you that I built a life on a foundation that looked firm because I pressed it hard with my heel, and it held. But foundations can hold for years and still be wrong. They can be poured with the wrong mixture and seem sturdy until a letter arrives, and the whole structure hums with a truth you can hear with your fingers. You might be waiting for that letter. You might not even know you're waiting. You might have organized your drawers in such a way that the envelope you need is always underneath the one you open. That's the thing about what we refuse. It becomes very good at hiding in the places we think are safe. On summer nights now, I open my window and listen to the city breathe. There's a siren sometimes, the long wail that reminds you people are in trouble and other people go toward it. There's laughter from the bar on the corner and a dog that has decided it owns the block. There's the low hum of the highway, 1,000 private journeys happening at once. I picture my father in his small house 2 states away, the light over his kitchen sink turned on, the calendar neat, the checkbook balanced, the sandwich assembled without artistry, his radio playing some oldies station where the songs sound like promises that still think they can keep themselves. When I was a girl, I thought staying was easy. Now I know it can be the bravest thing a person does. But that lesson did not come gently. It did not arrive as a moral taped to a gift. It arrived the way the important things do. Late, inconvenient, in handwriting you'd know anywhere. And when I finally held it, the story I told about the villain in my house began to tremble, then tilt, then show me where the beams had been all along. For years, I blamed my dad for my mother leaving. I blamed him so well that I didn't leave space for any other story. Then I opened an envelope, and inside was my mother's voice, steady and human, telling me something I had refused to hear, who held us together and who couldn't. This is the beginning. The rest will ask you, like it asked me, to look again. I don't remember the exact day when my mother's laughter began to sound like a visitor in our house instead of a resident. It must have been somewhere between my 10th birthday and my 12th, because in the photographs from those years her smile is still there, but her eyes already look away from the camera. Children notice these small things, the way a hand lingers on the back of a chair instead of a shoulder, the way dinners stretch out with longer silences between bites, the way the radio plays softer, as if the walls themselves don't want to disturb the unease that has settled inside them. At 12, I thought the world could be divided into villains and heroes, into those who break things and those who hold them. To me, my father was the breaker. He was the shadow that made my mother smaller. He was the silence that drowned out her song. He was the one who didn't fix the sadness that hung over the table. It never occurred to me that maybe he was holding more than I could see. I remember a night in winter, the kind of night when the cold gnaws at the windows and you can hear the pipes complain in the walls. I was supposed to be asleep, but children are natural spies when they sense a secret. I slipped out of bed, padded across the hall, and sat at the top of the staircase where I could look down through the banister. My parents were in the kitchen. My mother sat with her hands around a mug, steam rising into her face. My father leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes lowered. They weren't shouting, but the silence between them was louder than any argument I'd ever heard. "I can't keep doing this," my mother said. Her voice was brittle, like glass about to shatter. "We're fine," my father replied. His tone was steady, too steady, like a man trying to calm a fire without water. "We're not fine," she whispered. "We're surviving. That's not the same as living." I held my breath. My father rubbed his forehead with his palm. "Emma needs stability," he said finally. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice cracking on the last word. "Don't I matter too?" That was all I heard before I crept back into my room, heart pounding. But in that moment, I decided. I decided my father was the problem. I decided he had chosen me over her, and that made him selfish. I decided he was the reason her laughter had gone missing. Once you decide something about a parent, you begin to see the world through that decision. Confirmation bias, adults call it. Children just call it proof, and I began collecting proof with the diligence of a detective who already knows the culprit. When Dad forgot their anniversary the next spring, I marked it in my mental ledger. When he stayed late at work, I added another strike. When he answered questions with silence instead of explanations, I saw it as indifference, not restraint. I noticed the absences, not the presences. I remembered the nights he wasn't there, not the mornings he packed my lunch. I kept score, and he kept losing. The summer I turned 13, my mother and I planted a garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, cucumbers, and one row of marigolds just for beauty. We worked side by side, our hands in the soil, our knees stained green. My father came out with a pitcher of lemonade, set it on the porch, and watched us. "Don't plant them too close," he said, pointing to the tomatoes. "They need space to breathe." My mother brushed dirt from her cheek and said, "They are fine." He didn't argue. He just sipped his drink and went back inside. To me, his silence sounded like disapproval. To her, maybe it sounded like surrender. To him, maybe it was just tiredness. But I only heard what I wanted to hear. When school started that fall, I carried the heaviness with me. In the cafeteria, surrounded by the chatter of friends comparing summer trips and new shoes, I kept my head down. I envied girls whose mothers packed colorful lunches with notes tucked inside. Mine were practical: sandwiches, apples, a granola bar. My father made them with clumsy care, cutting the bread unevenly, forgetting to peel the apple. I resented those lunches, not because they were bad, but because they reminded me of what I didn't have. I wanted the tenderness of my mother's touch, not the awkwardness of my father's effort. By 14, when my mother finally left, I was ready to blame him for everything. She didn't leave in a storm. She left in a sigh. One day she was there, folding laundry with her quiet hum, and the next, her drawers were empty. She hugged me at the door, her suitcase at her feet, and whispered, "Be good for your dad." I clung to her, breathing in her perfume, willing her to stay. She pulled back, kissed my forehead, and walked away. My father stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. In that silence, I saw guilt. In his stillness, I saw failure. I barely looked at him. In my head, the verdict was already written. He had driven her away. Teenage rebellion takes many forms. Mine wasn't loud. It wasn't sneaking out at night or breaking rules for the thrill of it. Mine was quieter, colder. I answered my father in monosyllables. I rolled my eyes when he asked about school. I kept my headphones on at dinner, nodding to music that mattered less than the wall I was building between us. Every silence became a weapon I used against him, a mirror of the silence I thought had broken my mother. He tried in his way. He learned how to cook simple meals, spaghetti, chicken, pancakes. He asked about my day. He drove me to practice, sat in the truck with the engine running while I finished rehearsal. He left notes on the counter when he had to work late. "Pizza money in the envelope. Don't stay up too late. Proud of you." I crumpled them up without reading twice. I thought they were pathetic substitutes for love. I didn't realize they were love in his language. There was one night in high school when I stayed late for drama rehearsal. The parking lot was almost empty when I came out. My father's truck was there, engine idling, headlights cutting through the dusk. He climbed out, his boots heavy on the pavement, his jacket smelling faintly of oil and cold air. He looked tired, older than his years, but when he saw me, he smiled. A small, tentative smile, as if he wasn't sure I'd return it. "Ready to go?" he asked. I nodded and slid into the truck. The heater wheezed. We drove in silence for a while. Then he said, "I saw you up there. You were strong like your mother." I turned away, staring out the window. I should have said thank you. Instead, I muttered, "You don't know anything about her." His hands tightened on the wheel, then relaxed. He didn't reply. I thought his silence was guilt. Now I know it was restraint. At school, I envied friends whose parents came together to conferences. My father always came alone. He sat across from teachers, nodded seriously, and asked the right questions. They told him I was bright, that I had potential. He smiled, proud. I sat in the corner, embarrassed, wishing he wouldn't look so proud, wishing my mother was there instead. Afterwards, he always took me for ice cream. I barely spoke. He never forced me. He just ate his scoop slowly, watching me as if my silence was still something worth listening to. I carried my resentment like armor. At prom, I didn't invite him to take pictures. At graduation, I didn't search for his face in the crowd, though I know now he was there, clapping, his eyes shining. I thought I was punishing him. Really, I was punishing myself. Looking back, I see all the small ways he held our world together. The bills paid, the roof fixed, the groceries bought, the lunches packed, the rides given, the notes left. At the time, I saw none of it. I only saw absence. I only saw failure. I only saw the shadow of the man I believed had driven my mother away. Memory is a dangerous thing. It gives you fragments, and you build a story out of them. My story was simple. My father was the problem, and I was the victim of his failures. It was easier to believe that than to ask harder questions. Easier to blame than to understand. And so, for years, I lived behind the wall I built, certain of the story I had written. It would take a letter, years later, to show me how wrong I was. A letter in my mother's handwriting, a voice from the past telling me a truth I had refused to hear. But that, of course, comes later. For now, I was a teenager in Denver, carrying my blame like a shield, convinced I knew the whole story, when in fact I had only read the first chapter. When I moved into my dorm, I thought I was shedding my old skin. For years, I had carried my resentment like a shell, heavy and hard, and now I believed I could leave it behind with the Denver streets, with the smell of my father's truck, with the creak of the kitchen chair where he spent late nights balancing bills. I thought college would be the place where I finally escaped him. But distance doesn't erase blame. It only stretches it, like a shadow cast longer by the setting sun. The first few weeks on campus were a blur of orientations, new names, new buildings. My roommates' parents visited almost every weekend, bringing bags of groceries, decorative pillows, little tokens of home. They hugged their children in front of everyone, unashamed, whispering advice and encouragement. I stood by, pretending not to notice, telling myself I didn't care. But late at night, when the laughter in the hallway died down, I would lie awake and feel the hollow space where something should have been. My father didn't visit. He called once a week, usually Sunday evenings. His voice over the line was steady like always. "You doing okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "You eating enough?" "Yes." "You need anything?" "No." There would be a pause, the kind of silence that used to fill our house. Then he'd say, "Good. I'm proud of you, Em." I never knew what to do with those words. They felt too heavy, like stones I didn't want to carry. Sometimes I would mutter thanks, other times I would change the subject. But no matter how brief our calls were, he always ended with the same thing. "Love you, kiddo." I never said it back. Sophomore year, he drove up unannounced one Saturday morning. I was in the library, hunched over my laptop when my phone buzzed. Outside. "Got lunch." I groaned. The last thing I wanted was to be seen with him. My friends were nearby, and I had spent years crafting an image of independence. But guilt tugged at me, so I walked out to the parking lot. His old truck was there, paint chipped, a dent on the side from a job years ago. He leaned against it, holding a paper bag that smelled like fried chicken. "Thought you might be hungry," he said. I glanced around, hoping no one saw us. "I already ate." "Take it anyway," he said, thrusting the bag toward me. College kids are always hungry. I took it reluctantly. The grease seeped through the paper, warm against my hands. "You didn't have to drive all this way." I was in the area. I knew he wasn't. Our town was 8 hours away, but I didn't call him on the lie. I just said thanks and turned back toward the dorm. "You got time for lunch?" he asked. "Busy," I said over my shoulder. He nodded, as if he expected that answer. "All right then, study hard." I didn't watch him drive away. Later, when I opened the bag in my room, I found not just chicken, but also a folded envelope at the bottom. Inside was $50 and a note in his blocky handwriting, for books or coffee or whatever keeps you going. "Proud of you." I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash, but I kept the money. By junior year, I had perfected the art of distance. I answered his calls less frequently, sent shorter texts. He never complained. He adjusted, the way he always did, to whatever silence I gave him. When he did catch me on the phone, he filled the gaps with updates from home. The neighbor's dog had puppies, the church roof was leaking again, the Broncos were having a rough season. He never talked about himself. He never talked about my mother. Once, during winter break, I went home for a week. The house felt smaller, colder. My mother's absence still hung in the corners like a forgotten coat. My father had kept everything tidy, the bills stacked neatly, the dishes washed, the laundry folded. Too tidy, I thought, as if he were trying to prove something. On Christmas Eve, he made dinner, roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans. He even set the table with candles. When we sat down, he cleared his throat. "Your mom used to love Christmas dinner," he said softly. I stabbed a piece of potato. "Don't." He looked at me, puzzled. "Don't what?" "Don't talk about her, you don't get to." His face tightened, but he nodded. "Okay." We ate in silence after that. The next morning, I found a small box on the kitchen table. Inside was a silver necklace with a tiny heart pendant. A card lay beside it, "Merry Christmas. Always here for you." I shoved it back in the box and left it in my suitcase, unopened, when I returned to school. By the time I graduated, the distance between us had become a canyon. He sat in the bleachers during the ceremony, clapping when my name was called, but I didn't look for him. I posed for pictures with friends, tossed my cap in the air, laughed for the cameras. Later, I found him waiting by his truck, holding a bouquet of flowers, roses, slightly wilted from the sun. "Proud of you, Em," he said, handing them to me. I forced a smile. "Thanks." We drove to dinner, a small diner on the edge of town. He ordered a burger. I picked at a salad. He asked about my plans, my job interviews, my dreams. I gave short answers. He nodded, absorbing each one like it was precious. When the check came, he paid without hesitation. As we walked back to the truck, he slipped an envelope into my hand. "Just to help you get started," he said. Inside was $500. I wanted to refuse, to tell him I didn't need his charity, but I kept it. I always kept it. After college, I moved into a small apartment in the city. My job was demanding, the rent high, the hours long. I barely spoke to him. Sometimes weeks passed without a call. When I did pick up, he always answered on the first ring, his voice warm with relief. "How's work?" he asked. "Busy. Eating enough?" "Yes. Need anything?" "No." The script never changed. He always ended with, "Love you, kiddo." I never said it back. One evening, exhausted after a long day, I opened my mailbox to find a package. Inside was a thermos, the kind truckers use, and a note for those early mornings. "Don't forget to take care of yourself. Proud of you." I laughed bitterly. He still thought he could parent me with coffee and cash. He still thought he could fill the hole my mother left with trinkets and silence. He still didn't understand. But the truth was, I didn't understand either. I didn't understand that every drive, every envelope, every awkward note was his way of holding on. I didn't understand that his silence wasn't absence but sacrifice. I didn't understand that the canyon between us wasn't built by his failures alone, but by my refusal to see him as anything other than the villain I had cast him to be. Years passed like that, me keeping my distance, him quietly staying. Until the day came when his heart gave out, and I was forced to see just how wrong I had been. But that is another chapter. It happened in late autumn, the kind of season when the leaves crunch under your feet like brittle paper and the air carries the smell of wood smoke. I was 25, working long hours at a marketing firm downtown, living in an apartment with a view of the city lights but none of the comfort of home. My life was fast, loud, exhausting. I liked it that way. The noise kept me from hearing the echo of my own thoughts. My father still lived in the same house, the one with the peeling paint and the yard he mowed every Saturday morning, rain or shine. He had grown older, though I didn't let myself notice. His hair had thinned, his shoulders stooped slightly, but he carried himself as if nothing had changed. He still called me kiddo, still asked if I was eating enough, still ended every conversation with "love you." I still never said it back. One Friday evening, I got a call from a neighbor. Her voice was frantic. "Emma, it's your dad. He collapsed in the driveway. We called an ambulance. They're taking him to Mercy Hospital." The world tilted. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I grabbed my coat and keys, hailed a cab, and pressed my forehead against the cold window as the city blurred by. My hands shook in my lap. Fear bubbled up in my chest, but underneath it was something sharper, anger. Anger that he hadn't told me he was sick. Anger that once again he had kept silent about the things that mattered most. When I reached the hospital, I found him in a bed, wires attached to his chest, machines beeping steadily beside him. His face was pale, his skin almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. A nurse adjusted his Roman 4, then slipped out quietly, leaving us alone. "Dad," I whispered, pulling a chair close. He stirred, opened his eyes. They were tired but steady. "Hey, Em," he said as if nothing unusual had happened. "Don't hey, Em me," I snapped, my voice trembling. You collapsed. Why didn't you tell me you were sick? He shook his head. Didn't want to worry you. Didn't want to worry me. I leaned forward, my fists clenched. You scared me half to death. You could have died, and I wouldn't have known anything until I got a call from the neighbors. He sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. I'm fine now. You're not fine. The words burst out of me louder than I intended. You're hooked up to machines. You're lying in a hospital bed. That's not fine. He didn't answer. His silence filled the room, the same silence I had grown up with, the silence that had driven my mother away, or so I believed. I felt the old resentment surge up, hot and uncontrollable. If Mom were here, I said bitterly, this wouldn't have happened. The words hung in the air like smoke. I saw the flicker of pain in his eyes before he turned his head away. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the steady beep of the monitor, marking the rhythm of his heart. I hated myself for saying it, even as I said it, but another part of me felt justified. For years I had carried the belief that he was the reason she left, the reason our family had fractured. Now, seeing him vulnerable, frail, dependent on machines, it felt like proof. He had failed her. He had failed me, and I wanted him to know it. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits. I sat by his bed, scrolling through my phone, pretending not to watch him sleep. He cracked jokes with the nurses, asked about their families, thanked them for their care. He never complained. Not once. When the doctor explained that he had a heart condition that required medication and monitoring, he nodded calmly, as if it were just another item on his to-do list. You should have told me, I said again one evening, unable to let it go. He looked at me with tired eyes. I didn't want you to carry it. You've got your own life. My own life. I shook my head, tears pricking my eyes. You're my father, I should have known. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and placed it over mine. One day you'll understand, he said softly. I pulled my hand back, too angry, too hurt to accept his touch. Maybe, but not today. When he was finally discharged, I drove him home. The house looked the same, but everything felt different. I followed him inside, watched as he lowered himself into his favorite chair, the one by the window. He looked out at the yard, at the trees shedding their last leaves. You don't have to stay, he said. I'll be fine. You always say that, I muttered. Because it's true. He smiled faintly. I'm tougher than I look. I wanted to believe him, but all I saw was fragility, the cracks in the armor of the man I had spent my life resenting. And it terrified me, because if he was weak, then maybe the story I had told myself, that he was the villain, that he was the reason my mother left, was wrong. And if that story was wrong, then I would have to face the possibility that I had been unfair, that maybe I had wasted years building a wall between us for nothing. I wasn't ready for that, so I clung to my anger. That night, as I left his house, he called after me. Drive safe, kiddo. I didn't answer. I just shut the door behind me, the echo of my own bitterness louder than his voice. The breaking point had come. Neither of us knew it then, but that moment, my cruel words, his quiet endurance, was the deepest cut in our already fragile bond. It would take years and a letter from beyond the grave to stitch it back together. Grief comes in waves. Sometimes it trickles in quietly, like rain on a window. Other times it slams into you with the force of a storm, knocking the breath from your lungs. When I got the call that my mother had passed, the storm came. It was a Wednesday morning, unremarkable in every way until the phone rang. Aunt Maggie's voice was gentle but steady. Emma, honey, I'm sorry. Your mom, she's gone. I sat on the edge of my bed, the world tilting. I hadn't spoken to my mother in years. I didn't know where she lived, what she did with her days, whether she was happy. I told myself I didn't care, but the truth was I had always carried her absence like a phantom limb. And now that limb was gone entirely. There would be no reunion, no explanation, no apology. Just silence. I flew out for the small memorial. It wasn't much, some flowers, a circle of relatives, a few words spoken in a borrowed church hall. She had lived quietly those last years, it seemed, in a town I had never visited. People spoke kindly of her. They remembered her laugh, her gentleness, her way of making a room feel softer. I stood in the back, arms folded, unable to reconcile the image they painted with the woman who had walked out of my life without looking back. Afterward, as people drifted away, Aunt Maggie pressed an envelope into my hand. "She wanted you to have this," she said. "She wrote it a long time ago. I think she never found the courage to send it." The envelope was yellowed at the edges, the handwriting instantly familiar. I had seen it on lunchbox notes as a child, on permission slips, on grocery lists stuck to the fridge. My heart pounded as I traced the letters. For Emma, I didn't open it right away. I carried it home, tucked in my purse like a fragile thing that might crumble if exposed too soon. For days it sat on my nightstand. I'd glance at it in the mornings, at night, but I couldn't bring myself to break the seal. Part of me was afraid of what it might say, of what truths it might uncover, of how it might undo the story I had spent a lifetime telling myself. Finally, one evening, I couldn't resist any longer. I brewed a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and held the envelope in trembling hands. Slowly, I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the folded pages inside. Her handwriting flowed across the paper, looping and elegant. My eyes blurred with tears before I even began to read. "My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to tell you these words while I was still alive. I should have been braver. But the truth is, I was weak in ways I hope you never have to be. I left not because your father failed me, but because I failed myself. I was tired, Emma. Tired in my bones, tired in my soul. The world felt too heavy, and I didn't know how to carry it. Your father carried so much more than you ever knew. He worked himself to the bone to keep us safe, to keep food on the table, to give us a life. And I grew restless. I told myself I wanted more, but really I just wanted to escape the weight I felt inside me. Please don't hate him for my leaving. He didn't drive me away. If anything, he held me together longer than I deserved. He was the strong one, Emma, stronger than I ever was. He stayed when I couldn't. He gave when I couldn't. He loved us both more than I was able to show. I know you've probably blamed him. I fear you may even hate him. But I beg you, look again. Remember the lunches he made, the long hours he worked, the way he showed up for you even when I didn't. Those weren't small things, they were everything. They were love in his quiet way. I am sorry I left you with questions. I am sorry I wasn't the mother you needed me to be. But I want you to know this, your father was never your enemy. He was your protector, your anchor, the one holding our family together when I was falling apart. Love always, Mom. I set the letter down, my hands shaking, tears spilling onto the paper. The words blurred, but I didn't need to see them anymore. I had memorized them in one reading. My chest ached with a grief deeper than I had ever known. For years I had blamed him. For years I had turned every silence into a crime, every shortcoming into proof of guilt. And all along it had been her. Not in malice, not in cruelty, but in weakness. She had left because she couldn't stay. And he had stayed, carrying both of us while I sharpened my anger against him. Memories crashed over me, relentless. The lunches I dismissed, the envelopes of cash I called charity, the notes I crumpled. The truck rides, the graduations, the late nights he stayed up fixing things I never noticed. His steady voice, his tired eyes, his quiet presence, all of it reframed by her words. He was the one holding everything together, and I had been too blind, too angry to see it. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed. Sobbed for the mother I had lost, for the father I had wounded, for the years wasted in bitterness. Sobbed for the little girl who had chosen the wrong side, who had built her life on a lie. When the tears finally subsided, I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, staring at the letter spread out before me. My father's face filled my mind, not the villain I had painted, but the man who had carried me through storms I didn't even know existed. I thought of him sitting alone in that house, the same house my mother had walked out of, the same house he had kept alive with his quiet strength. I knew what I had to do. For the first time in years, I reached for my phone, not to text, not to send a short reply, but to call, to hear his voice, to tell him I was sorry, to tell him I finally understood. My hands trembled as I dialed. The night I read my mother's letter, I barely slept. I lay in bed with the pages pressed to my chest, her handwriting etched into my memory, her confession rewriting the story I had lived by for over a decade. Every time I closed my eyes, her words returned. He was the one holding us together longer than I ever could. Morning light crept through the blinds, soft and pale. My body felt heavy, my mind raw, but one thought burned steady. I had to see him. The drive back to my father's house felt different this time. The road I had traveled countless times before now carried a new weight. I noticed things I used to ignore. The way the mountains stood guard on the horizon, the small towns stitched together with diners and gas stations, the yards with children's toys scattered across the grass. I wondered how many times my father had driven these same roads, tired from work, carrying groceries in the back, thinking of me. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked unchanged. The paint still peeled, the porch light still hung slightly crooked, the old truck still sat parked in its usual spot. But to me, everything looked new, because now I saw it through the lens of her letter, through the truth I had denied for so long. He opened the door before I could knock, as if he had been waiting. His face lit up in surprise, then softened into that familiar half-smile. "Emma," he said simply. I froze, my throat tightening. For years I had imagined this moment, how I would confront him, accuse him, demand answers. But now all I could do was step forward and wrap my arms around him. For a heartbeat, he stiffened, startled. Then his arms came around me, strong but gentle, and I felt the steady rhythm of his heart against my cheek. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words muffled. "Dad, I'm so sorry." He pulled back just enough to look at me. His eyes were tired, lined with years of silence, but they shone with something I hadn't seen in a long time, relief. "You don't have to be sorry," he said softly. "Yes, I do." Tears spilled down my face. "I blamed you for everything, for Mom leaving, for the way things were. I hated you and it wasn't fair. I didn't know. I didn't understand." He reached up and brushed a tear from my cheek with his thumb like he used to when I was a little girl. "You were a kid, Em. Kids don't always see the whole picture. That's not your fault." But I held on to it, I said, choking on the words. "Even when I was old enough to know better, I kept pushing you away. I kept hurting you." His hand fell back to his side and he gave a small shrug. "That's what love does sometimes. It hurts, but it also stays." I stared at him, the weight of years pressing down on me. "How did you do it? How did you keep loving me when I treated you like?" My voice broke. "Because you're my daughter," he said simply. "And that's what fathers do. We stay." The simplicity of his words undid me. I collapsed into his arms again, sobbing, and he held me, steady as ever. Later, we sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I had once glared at him, where I had crumpled his notes and rolled my eyes at his questions. Now it felt different. Now it felt like a place of return. He brewed coffee, the smell filling the room. He slid a mug toward me. "Still take it black?" he asked. I nodded, smiling faintly through my tears. We sat in silence for a while, but this silence was not the old, suffocating kind. This silence was soft, gentle, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket. "I found her letter," I said finally. His hand stilled on the mug. He looked at me, something flickering in his eyes. "You did?" I nodded. "She told me everything. She told me it wasn't you, that you were the one holding us together." My voice cracked. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you defend yourself?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Because what good would it have done? You needed to love your mother, to hold on to her in some way. If hating me helped you do that, then I could take it." The tears came again, hot and relentless. "You shouldn't have had to." He shook his head. "That's what parents do, Emma. We take the weight so our kids don't have to." I reached across the table and took his hand. His skin was rough, calloused, but warm. I wasted so many years, I whispered. He squeezed my hand gently. We've got time now. That evening he made dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti, the same meal he had cooked clumsily when I was a teenager. But this time I tasted it differently. I tasted the effort, the love hidden in the routine. We ate together, laughing softly over small things, rediscovering the comfort of each other's company. Afterward, we sat in the living room. He pulled out an old photo album, one I hadn't seen in years. We flipped through the pages. Pictures of me in pigtails, of family holidays, of birthdays with lopsided cakes. My mother's face smiled up at us from the pages, and for the first time I didn't feel only bitterness. I felt gratitude for the moments we had, for the love she had given, even if she couldn't stay. Do you miss her? I asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment, then he nodded. Every day, but I learned to live with the missing because I still had you. The words pierced me, both tender and devastating. All those years I had thought I was alone in my loss. I hadn't realized he had been carrying it too, silently, steadily, while also carrying me. We sat together late into the night, the old clock ticking in the corner, the house creaking softly around us. And for the first time in years, I felt at home. Not in the building, not in the furniture, but in his presence. Healing doesn't happen in one night. It doesn't erase the past or undo the hurt. But that night was the beginning of seeing him clearly, the beginning of forgiveness, his for me, mine for myself. And as I hugged him before bed, whispering, "I love you," for the first time in years, I felt something inside me finally unclench. Life doesn't announce the moments when it begins to change. Sometimes they slip in quietly, an unexpected letter, a phone call, a meal at a kitchen table you once resented. Other times, they arrive in the simple act of looking at someone you thought you knew and finally seeing them clearly. In the weeks after I returned to my father's house, I found myself relearning him. The man I had painted as cold and distant was, in truth, a man who loved in the only way he knew how, steadily, practically, without demand. He wasn't a poet or a dreamer. He didn't drape words across the air like garlands, but he showed up, every day, through broken ovens and empty chairs, through teenage silence and adult accusations. He stayed. I watched him more carefully now, the way he folded his shirts with patient precision, the way he rubbed his thumb along the rim of his coffee mug when he was thinking, the way he paused before speaking, weighing his words as if they were bricks in a wall he was careful not to build too high. I saw tenderness in these things. I saw love. Sometimes we sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sky fade from gold to indigo. He would sip his coffee, and I would sip tea, and for long stretches we said nothing. But it wasn't the silence that used to choke me. It was a silence that felt safe, like two instruments resting between notes in the same song. One evening I asked him, "Did you ever think about leaving, like Mom did?" He shook his head slowly. "Of course not. Somebody had to stay, somebody had to be the net." "The net?" He smiled faintly. "You don't notice a net when you're walking the tightrope. You only notice when it's gone." I turned those words over in my mind for days. A net. That's what he had been all along. The reason I never fell completely, even when I tried to push him away. The reason there was always something beneath me, holding me up, whether I acknowledged it or not. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a practice, a rhythm you learn, like breathing. Each day I tried to let go a little more of the anger I had carried. Each day I tried to see him not as the villain of my childhood story, but as the man who had loved me imperfectly, but truly. And in that practice, I began to forgive myself too, for being blind, for being cruel, for taking so long to arrive at this understanding. One Sunday morning, I found myself cooking breakfast in his kitchen. Pancakes, bacon, coffee. He shuffled in, surprised. "What's all this?" he asked. "Thought it was my turn," I said with a smile. He chuckled, sitting down at the table. "Smells good." We ate together, the sunlight spilling across the table, and I realized how far we had come. From silent meals filled with resentment to mornings filled with gentle laughter. From accusations to acceptance. From distance to closeness. After breakfast, we walked to the park near the house. Children played on the swings, their laughter carrying through the crisp air. My father watched them with a softness in his eyes. "You were about that size when your mom left," he said quietly. I slipped my arm through his. "I know, but you were here." He patted my hand. That's what mattered. In that moment, I felt something settle inside me, a peace I hadn't known before, a peace that came not from erasing the past, but from finally seeing it clearly. Looking back now, I realize love doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it's not flowers or grand gestures or perfectly chosen words. Sometimes it's a man showing up with grease-stained hands and a tired smile. Sometimes it's envelopes slipped quietly onto desks, sandwiches packed clumsily, trucks waiting in parking lots. Sometimes it's silence, not because there's nothing to say, but because staying is the loudest declaration of love there is. My mother's letter gave me truth, but my father's life gave me something greater, understanding. He was never the villain. He was the one holding us together, quietly, faithfully, while I spent years blaming him for the fracture. He was the net. And now, when I think of family, I think of that. Not perfection, not easy words, but the simple act of staying. If you've listened to this story, thank you. I hope it reminds you to look again at the people in your life, the ones you may have misunderstood, the ones who stay quietly in the background, the ones whose love doesn't shout but whispers through steady presence. I wish you health, peace, and happiness with your families. May you treasure the ones who stay and forgive the ones who falter. And if stories like this touch you, I invite you to stay with me too. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next one. Sometimes all it takes is one story to remind us we're not alone. From my heart to yours, thank you.